Hi, this is Kenny Albert. You're watching the Power Play Break, the place to talk about pucks.
Back here on the Power Play Break, the place to talk about pucks with Kenny Albert. Kenny, talk about now, you do 2 years with the Skipjacks, and you're going to wind up going to the big club with the Capitals. Talk about that transition. I mean, that's got it. You finally say to yourself, all right, now I'm going to really get my shot.
That was 92, 93, 2 years with the Skipjacks, like you said, and had gotten to know a lot of the people in D.C., and they made a decision to split the Capitals broadcast, the home and away, different crews. So I was hired to do the home games on Home Team Sports with Craig Laughlin, who does a great job.
Still there today?
Former Cap player, still there 20 years later with Joe Beninati, yep. So, yeah, that was tremendous. Got to do 30 home games for the most part. We would do a couple of away games. And also got a job working at WTOP Radio at the time, doing sports updates at 15 and 45 down in D.C. So the Caps were a good team in those years. I was there 3 years, 92 to 95, and made the playoffs every year. My first year lost to the Islanders in that 6-game first-round series and a bunch of overtime games. Ray Ferraro and Brian Mullen, who I would work with later on, scored some big goals in that series. And then Jim Schoenfeld takes over as head coach the next year, and they upset the Penguins in the playoffs before losing to the Rangers, who would go on to win the Cup.
Talk about now, you're down there, you're a Ranger fan because you've grown up with them. How did it feel all of a sudden saying, well, I'm doing the Capitals now? I mean, did you sit there and say to yourself, like, it's just a job, I got to do this, or, you know, that kind of a...
Yeah, I mean, I was actually a Canucks fan, too. I was Canucks and Rangers as a kid. Don't ask why, no idea.
We'll get to that in a minute.
No, I think once I moved down and I had been involved with the Skipjacks for a couple of years, and that became my team and my organization, so it wasn't really tough transitioning over to the Capitals because I had been entrenched sort of in their organization for the prior 2 years.
Now, you've done that. You're down there for a little while with Washington. They're going to come... How did you wind up coming back to the Rangers all of a sudden? I mean, that's kind of, you know, now you're going to be coming back. Your dad had this position, now I'm going to have this position.
It's an interesting story. That was the summer of 95, and I loved it down in D.C. Not only did I do the Capitals games, but I filled in on some Orioles games and filled in on some Bullets games. So it was a really good gig down there. Yeah. And I had great relationships with the folks who hired me. I was 24, 25 at the time when they took a chance on me. So felt really bad about leaving when this situation came about. But they understood and moved on. But earlier in the summer, there was an opportunity to potentially come and do the Islanders because Jiggs McDonald had retired at that point. So there was a potential opportunity there, which didn't materialize. I wound up staying in Washington. And then Howie Rose winds up getting the Islander/Mets offer to do Islander and Mets TV at the time. So he takes that, and then the Ranger radio spot opens up. So it was a tough decision at first because I had great relationships with the folks down at HTS and DC and really enjoyed doing the Caps on TV. But it was really an offer I couldn't pass up, coming back home. It really was. As a youngster, that was the job. I never even thought about doing football on TV, baseball, some of the other stuff that I've been doing now for a long time. It really was doing hockey on the radio. So it really was a dream job, and wound up moving up in 95, and here we are 18 years later.
Talk about, your dad had influences on you, your uncles did, but talk about Jim Robinson, his influence, the Canucks announcer. You just mentioned you're a Canucks fan. Kind of an odd thing to think 3,000 miles away from where you're growing up in New York that you'd have such a tie to a team that not too many people in the New York area would know about.
Right. Not sure how I became a Canucks fan. You wouldn't get their games on TV. You'd barely see anything about them in the paper. And Jim Robinson was their announcer. I never really heard much of his broadcast, but I wrote him some letters as a youngster because he was the Canucks broadcaster, and he would write back and correspond. And then once I got into the business, I'd see him, and we got to know each other pretty well. But as far as other announcers that I love listening to, Howie Rose, who I just mentioned, and Mike Emmerich, who, during my high school years, Howie started doing the Rangers, and Doc Emmerich did the Devils, of course, and they were two of the guys that I really enjoyed listening to and have became good friends and still enjoy their work to this day.
You're the only play-by-play guy right now to cover all 4 sports leagues. I mean, that's pretty remarkable when you think about it. There's tons of guys out there doing this for a living. How do you keep up?
Well, that statement is still correct because I did one NBA game in 2013. Otherwise,
it would not be true.
Otherwise, it would not be true. But for a couple of years, I filled in on a bunch of Knicks games for Mike Breen. So 2009, 10, 11, 12. and then this year just one, but it's still accurate. We'll see what happens in 2014. But really involved in 3 significantly with the NHL, football, and baseball. And there have been a lot of other guys who have done all 4.
Yeah.
Somebody came out with a list a few years ago. There have been at least 15 guys.
I've done all 4,
including sports. 3 others in my family, but also guys like Spencer Ross and Bob Wischusen here in New York, and many others. There's about 15 guys that have done all 4, but I think currently, like you said, I'm the only one. The last couple of years that have. But I've always enjoyed the variety. Even though growing up hockey was my goal, a lot of us really fell into a right place at the right time situation with Fox in '94 when Fox took the football rights away from CBS, and did a game last week, New England and Tampa Bay, which started season number 20, not only for Fox, but for me and some of the others at Fox, which is crazy to think about. But just really enjoy the variety, and I've been very lucky. I realize how fortunate I am to have been involved in all 4.
Okay, let's go back to October 25th, 2009. This is absolutely amazing. 4 sports in 4 days.
With an off day in between. There was actually, I think there was a day off.
It says here that on my notes.
Because two in one day.
Yeah.
So.
You had Minnesota Vikings.
Could have made it 5 in 5 days if I found like a college wrestling match or something.
You did the Minnesota Vikings Pittsburgh Steelers game for Fox. Then you hosted the New York Yankees locker room celebration after clinching the American League Championship Series that night. Followed by a Rangers game on the radio on October 28th.
Right, that was Monday.
Yeah, and then you did the New York Knicks season opener. That's a lot of stuff to cover in a very short amount of time. I mean, you talked about prep work. How do you keep the head, on each different thing you're doing? It's very difficult.
Yeah, the weekend was real hectic because the football game was Minnesota at Pittsburgh, so that you're preparing for all week, prior, so that's fine. You're in there Friday and Saturday meeting with the teams and taping interviews. Getting back to New York was a little hectic, in case there were flight issues. Fox had asked me to do the locker room interviews following. So I didn't do the baseball game. I didn't do the actual play-by-play.
You actually were there.
But had to be there to watch what was going on. And then the Yankees wind up clinching the series, so I'm interviewing all the guys in the locker room after the game. So that was a lot of fun. The Ranger game the next night, that's sort of like riding a bike because I had probably already done 10 Ranger games that month. So that really wasn't heavy lifting. And then the Knicks game was 2 days later, so you had some time to prepare for that. So the Sunday was really the hectic, doing the football game in Pittsburgh, going to the airport, getting on the flight, heading right to Yankee Stadium, and getting prepared for the interviews. And if the Yankees hadn't won that night, Game 7 would have been the next night, so I would have missed the hockey game. Yeah. But as it worked out, they win. And there's a funny story from that baseball evening. I'm interviewing A-Rod and Joe Girardi and then CC Sabathia, some of the other Yankees, and I'm standing here, and the Yankee folks are to my right. Out of the corner of my eye, I see Mayor Bloomberg to my left. And as it turns out, I got home and watched, I had recorded the game, so I watched it back. At one point, he's on TV. You could see him standing there sort of waiting to be interviewed. And the producer's telling me in my ear, do not turn to your left. Do not turn to Mayor Bloomberg. It turns out it was an election the next week. And if we had interviewed Mayor Bloomberg, Fox would then have had to give equal time to his opponent or opponents.
That's right.
So there was a certain protocol in place. And even though he's standing there on screen, we could not do an interview with him.
Okay, I did some other research on you, and I found out you've
been busy.
I've been busy. Hey, you got to do the research. That's the whole key. Talk about doing your 2 movies. Do the kids like it? I mean, did you have a good time with it? You were in Game Day with Richard Lewis, and you were in Juwanna Mann. Talk about the difference. Was there prep work? Was there anything with that? Or was it quick? I've never seen it, so I can't comment on it.
Oh, come on! I can get you a copy of it.
Yeah, I'll have to get a copy later. But was it fun? Was it different? I mean,
it was a lot of fun. Game Day, not many people have seen it. Went right to video. Richard Lewis is actually a good friend. He was before and still is, and he was Coach Adler. He was a basketball coach in the movie, and it was filmed up, I think, at Fordham or somewhere near Fordham at a gym. And that was before the kids were born, actually. I asked about the kids. That was in '97. And it basically took 4 or 5 hours, my part. And I do have somewhat of a significant role. I'm the announcer, the play-by-play announcer, but a majority, a good portion of the movie are the basketball scenes. So my voice is heard throughout that movie. Again, went right to video. It's still available out there on the internet somewhere. Juwanna Mann made it into the theaters, and that was.
Did you go to premiere?
I went to one of the premieres. There wasn't a huge, Hollywood type premiere, but there were a couple of smaller premieres. I did go to that, and that was in the early 2000s. And the backstory about my trip to Juwanna Mann, it was down in Charlotte, at the old Charlotte Coliseum near the airport where the Hornets used to play.
Yeah.
And I flew down on a Sunday night. We were filming on a Monday, and for some reason, I'm a much more experienced traveler now. For some reason, I checked the bag with my suits and clothing and everything that I was supposed to wear on the movie set.
Did he give you a wardrobe?
Well, here's what happened. So, for some reason, I didn't carry on a bag just in case, and I never lose luggage, never have a problem with luggage. As we are about to board the flight, a terrible storm comes down at LaGuardia, and all the flights start getting delayed, and I'm thinking to myself, I have to get down there. The call's at like 6 a.m. the next day. So luckily, I do make it onto a flight, land in Charlotte at like midnight, luggage doesn't make it. Okay. And I have to be there in 6 hours. So I scramble to just to get a toothbrush and contact solution. I have no clothes. So I show up at the movie shoot the next day wearing what I wore on the flight the day before. So I had to borrow, a shirt, sport jacket, pants. So what I'm wearing in Juwanna Mann were not my clothes. But my color analyst was actually Kevin Frazier, who now hosts Entertainment Tonight, who was a sportscaster at Fox at the time. So he and I did a couple of scenes together. In Juwanna Mann, I'm only in a few scenes right at the start of the movie. But I just got a residual check last week for $2.34. Every time it runs, that's a true story. Every time it runs on cable, a check comes in for 16 cents, $3,
what do they say
$2.50.
What do they say at the bank when you show up with a check like that?
One of the checks I received, the stamp actually cost more than what was inside the envelope. But it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
All right, we get back. Ricky O is going to take over the seat here and talk to Kenny more about the Rangers aspect of his life right after this.